In the summer of 1945, Japanese women held as prisoners of war in Guam witnessed something that shattered everything they'd been taught about their American captors. U.S. soldiers openly hugging, kissing, and playing with their children right in front of them. These women had been told Americans were barbaric demons, yet here were warriors showing a tenderness that Japanese military culture strictly forbade. What did these women discover about strength, love, and humanity that would change how they raised their own children after the war?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In April of 1945, the island of Okinawa had become a place of fire and death. The sky filled with smoke so thick it turned day into twilight. American warships surrounded the island like a steel fence, their guns thundering day and night. On the ground, Japanese soldiers fought from caves and tunnels, knowing they would never leave this island alive. Their orders were clear: death before surrender, death before dishonor. Among the defenders were 3 women who never imagined they would see combat. Fumiko was 23 years old and worked as a nurse for the Imperial Army. Her father was a school teacher who had raised her with stories of ancient warriors who chose death over shame. She wore a white armband with a red cross, but it offered no protection from shells and bullets. Keiko was 28, a widow whose husband had died fighting on an island called Guadalcanal 2 years earlier. She had a young son back home in Tokyo, and she worked in a field hospital, cleaning wounds and holding down screaming soldiers during surgery. Yuki was only 19, a university student who had been pulled from her classes and sent to the front. The government told her this was her duty, her chance to serve the emperor who was divine, who was a living god. These women had grown up in a Japan at war. Since they were children, they had practiced air raid drills and learned to make bandages from old clothes. Their brothers and fathers marched off to war, in China, in the Philippines, across the Pacific. Radio broadcasts told them Japan was winning, that American soldiers were cowards and criminals, that capture meant torture and death. The phrase they heard most often was Kichiku Bei-e, which meant Americans and British were demons in human form. Not just enemies, not just foreigners, actual monsters who would do unspeakable things to prisoners. In school, children practiced with bamboo spears, preparing to fight the invasion everyone knew was coming. Yuki remembered her professor at university standing before the class and saying that Japanese people were superior, that their blood was pure, that their spirit was unbreakable. Fumiko remembered her father telling her that a samurai who was captured could never return home, that such shame was worse than any wound. Keiko remembered her husband's last letter, written before he shipped out. He promised he would never surrender, that he would fight until his last breath, that she should be proud no matter what happened. Now, in April of 1945, that invasion had come to Okinawa. American Marines landed on beaches and pushed inland. Japanese soldiers fought from every cave, every ruined building, every rice paddy. The 3 women worked in a field hospital set up in a cave system near the southern end of the island. They had almost no medicine left. Bandages were washed and reused until they fell apart. Soldiers died on dirt floors, calling for their mothers. The sound of American artillery grew closer each day. Officers began destroying documents and equipment. Some spoke quietly about what would happen when the Americans broke through. The women heard these conversations. They knew what was expected of them. Several soldiers had already committed suicide rather than face capture. One young private, barely older than Yuki, had pulled the pin on a grenade and held it to his chest. The explosion had been so close that Fumiko had felt the heat on her face. On April 23rd, American soldiers reached their position. The women heard English voices outside the cave, harsh and foreign. Fumiko felt her hands shaking. This was the moment they had been taught to fear above all others. This was when the demons would come. She looked at Keiko, who was praying quietly. She looked at Yuki, whose face had gone pale as paper. An officer nearby drew his pistol. For a moment, Fumiko thought he might shoot them to spare them from what was coming. Instead, he shot himself. The sound echoed through the cave like thunder. American voices grew louder. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Someone shouted in broken Japanese to come out. The three women held hands and walked toward the cave entrance, certain they were walking toward their deaths. They had heard the stories. They knew what happened to prisoners. Better to die quickly than to suffer. But when they emerged into the sunlight, squinting and terrified, the American soldiers didn't shoot them. A young Marine, his uniform dirty and torn, lowered his rifle. He said something in English. Another soldier, older, stepped forward with his hands empty and open. He spoke a few words of Japanese. Water, safe, medical. Fumiko couldn't understand. Where was the violence? Where was the cruelty? A medic approached, his bag marked with a red cross like hers. He gestured to a wound on Keiko's arm, an injury from shrapnel 2 days earlier. He cleaned it gently and wrapped it with a clean white bandage, the first clean bandage Fumiko had seen in weeks. Then something happened that would stay with Fumiko forever. One of the American soldiers, a man with red hair and freckles, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. He showed it to them, pointing and smiling. In the photograph were 2 small children, a boy and a girl standing in a yard with a white fence. The soldier pointed to himself, then to the children. His children, his family. Fumiko stared at the photograph. Her mind struggled to make sense of it. These men were supposed to be monsters. They were supposed to be inhuman. But this soldier had children. He carried their picture close to his heart. He smiled when he looked at them, the way any father would smile.
The cognitive dissonance felt like being struck. Everything she had been taught, everything she believed, suddenly seemed less solid, less certain. If they lied about this, she thought, what else might be a lie? But the thought was too dangerous to follow. Not yet. Not while she was still in shock, still trying to understand why she was alive at all. The 3 women were loaded onto a transport plane and flown to Guam. The flight itself shocked them. In Japan, civilians were lucky to find space on a cargo train. Here, prisoners of war flew in an aircraft with seats and windows. When they landed, guards escorted them to a compound surrounded by chain-link fences. The buildings were wooden but solid, with real roofs and floors. Each woman received a cot with a mattress, a thin one, but cleaner than anything they had slept on in months. The first meal arrived that evening. A soldier carried in metal trays and set them on a table. Fumiko stared at what she saw. White rice, not the brown or mixed grain they ate in Japan. Vegetables that looked fresh, not wilted or rotting. Canned peaches in sweet syrup. Bread, actual wheat bread, soft and still warm. There was more food on one tray than most Japanese families saw in a week. Keiko picked up a piece of bread and started crying. She could not stop. She thought of her son back in Tokyo, eating watered-down millet and whatever scraps her sister could find. Here, in a prison camp, on a military base thousands of miles from America, there was fresh bread. She tried to eat but could barely swallow. The contrast felt like a weight on her chest. The second week brought more impossible sights. American Red Cross workers arrived, women in crisp uniforms carrying boxes. They handed out care packages to the prisoners. Inside were chocolate bars wrapped in paper, small bars of soap that smelled like flowers, toothbrushes with real bristles, and cloth pads for menstruation. Fumiko held the chocolate bar in her hand and remembered how in Japan, chocolate was something only rich children had seen before the war. Now it was given to prisoners. One of the Red Cross women sat down beside them. She was older, maybe 50, with gray hair pinned back. She asked in slow, careful English if they needed anything. When they did not understand, she tried hand gestures. She pointed to herself and said her name was Margaret. She smiled, not the cruel smile of someone with power over prisoners, but a genuine smile of concern. She asked about their families using simple words and gestures. Where from? Children? Husband? Yuki tried to answer in broken English learned from textbooks. Margaret listened carefully and nodded. She showed them a photograph from her own wallet, her son in a military uniform. She touched the picture gently and her eyes looked sad. Yuki understood. Margaret's son was fighting this war too, maybe fighting against Japanese soldiers. Yet here she was, treating Japanese prisoners with kindness. It made no sense according to everything they had been taught.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The third week, the women were assigned to work duty. This was expected. Prisoners worked. But instead of harsh labor, they were sent to help in the kitchen of the base mess hall. When they walked in, all three stopped and stared. The kitchen was bigger than most houses in Japan. Industrial refrigerators hummed along one wall, each one taller than a man. Electric mixers sat on steel counters. There was a conveyor system for washing dishes, something Yuki had only read about in technical journals. The sheer scale of it overwhelmed them. The head cook, a large man named Sergeant Murphy, showed them how to peel potatoes using a mechanical peeler. In Japan, every potato was peeled by hand, carefully, wasting nothing. Here, a machine did it in seconds. He showed them industrial ovens that could cook 50 loaves of bread at once. He opened a refrigerator, and inside were dozens of chickens, whole chickens, ready to be cooked. Fumiko had not seen a whole chicken since before the war started. Then a truck arrived outside. Through the kitchen window, they watched two soldiers unload crate after crate of glass bottles. Coca-Cola! Hundreds of bottles, just for drinking, not for anything important, not for medicine or fuel, just bottles of sweet soda water that soldiers could have whenever they wanted. The truck driver was whistling. He seemed happy. This was normal to him. Yuki felt something crack inside her understanding of the world. This was a forward military base, she thought. This was not even America. This was just one base on one island in the Pacific, and it had more food, more equipment, more of everything than all of Tokyo combined. If this is what they have here, what does their actual country have? How could Japan have ever thought it could win a war against this? The fourth week brought the moment that changed everything. The women were working in the kitchen, washing vegetables at a large sink. Through the window, they could see an open area where off-duty soldiers sometimes played baseball. That afternoon, a game had started. Young men in casual clothes throwing a ball, running, laughing. It looked almost peaceful, almost normal. Except these were the same men who fought and killed in battle. Then a jeep pulled up near the field. An officer stepped out, and from the other side, two children climbed out. A girl about 5 years old with blonde pigtails, and a boy maybe 7 with a baseball glove. The officer was their father. He was stationed here with his family living in nearby housing. What happened next made all three women stop working completely. The officer walked onto the field, and the little girl ran to him. He bent down, scooped her up with both arms, and lifted her into the air. She squealed with delight. He spun her around once, twice, 3 times, then brought her close and kissed her forehead. Not once, but over and over. The little boy ran up, and the father knelt down, getting on one knee so he was at eye level with his son. The boy was talking excitedly about something, probably the baseball game, and the father listened with complete attention. Then he pulled both children into a hug, holding them tight against his chest. The 3 women stood frozen at the window. In Japan, fathers did not act this way, especially not military fathers, especially not in public. Men were supposed to be strong, controlled, disciplined. Children bowed to their fathers. Physical affection was private, rare, given sparingly. But here was an officer in uniform, a warrior, showing tenderness without any shame at all. Keiko whispered, her voice barely audible. He holds them like they are the most precious thing in the world. Fumiko could not look away. These men fight just as hard as Japanese soldiers, she thought, maybe harder. They kill and die in terrible battles, but then they come back to this. They come back to being fathers who hug their children. They do not have to choose between being strong and being loving. For them, both things exist at the same time.
The father picked up a baseball and tossed it gently to his son. The boy caught it and jumped with excitement. Other soldiers waved at the children. One man gave the little girl a piece of candy from his pocket. Everyone was smiling. It was such an ordinary scene, the kind that happens in parks and yards everywhere. But to these three women, it was revolutionary. July 4th arrived with a celebration unlike anything the three women had ever seen. The American Guards told them it was Independence Day, a holiday marking when America became its own country. The entire base prepared for festivities. Colorful banners went up on buildings, long tables appeared in the outdoor areas. Soldiers who usually looked tired and serious now moved with energy and excitement. The prisoners were told they could watch from a designated area near the fence. Guards assured them they were safe, that this was just a party. Fumiko, Keiko, and Yuki sat on wooden benches with other prisoners, confused about why Americans would celebrate so openly during a war. In Japan, every holiday had been canceled. Every celebration was deemed wasteful. The only parties allowed were for military victories, and those had stopped happening years ago. As the afternoon began, families started arriving. Wives in summer dresses holding hands with children, elderly couples walking slowly, the men wearing hats against the sun. Young soldiers rushed to greet their families, embracing them without hesitation. The women watched a young Marine lift his wife off her feet and spin her around, both of them laughing. His parents stood nearby, smiling, waiting their turn for hugs. Tables filled with food, not just military rations, but home-cooked dishes brought by families. Pies and cakes sat on checkered tablecloths. Someone set up a grill and the smell of cooking meat filled the air. A truck arrived with blocks of ice, and several soldiers began hand-cranking ice cream makers. Children gathered around, watching the process with fascination. The abundance was staggering. In Japan, sugar had disappeared years ago. Here, children ate cake and ice cream at a casual outdoor party.
Music started playing from speakers someone had set up. American songs with fast rhythms and brass instruments. Some people started dancing right there on the grass. Young couples swayed together. A grandmother danced with her grandson, the little boy standing on her feet as she moved. Then Fumiko saw him, a young soldier, maybe 25 years old, walking hand in hand with a woman who must be his wife. On his shoulders sat a little girl, maybe 2 years old, her hands tangled in his hair for balance. The child was giggling, bouncing slightly with each step her father took. The soldier reached up and held her tiny feet steady, making sure she felt secure. When they reached the food tables, he lifted the girl down slowly, carefully, keeping eye contact with her the whole time. He knelt in the grass so his face was level with hers. She said something and pointed at the ice cream. He nodded seriously, as if she had said something very important. Then he touched her nose with his finger, and she laughed, a bright sound that carried across the field. He picked her up again, this time cradling her against his chest, and kissed the top of her head while reaching for a bowl of ice cream with his free hand. Something broke inside Fumiko in that moment. Not broke like something damaged, but broke like ice breaking on a river in spring. Everything solid in her beliefs cracked and shifted. She had been taught her entire life that strength meant hardness, that warriors must be like steel, cold and unbending, that showing softness made you weak, made you vulnerable, made you less than what you should be. Her father had taught her this. Her teachers had taught her this. The entire culture of Japan had taught her this. But watching this soldier, she understood something new. He was strong. He fought in battles, carried weapons, faced death. But he also held his daughter with infinite gentleness. He knelt in the dirt to listen to her. He kissed her head in front of hundreds of people without any embarrassment. And none of the other soldiers thought less of him for it. If anything, they respected him more. She could see it in how they smiled at his family, how they waved to his daughter. These men fight knowing they might die, Fumiko thought, but they fight to live. They fight to come home to moments like this. We were taught to die for the emperor's glory. They fight to live for their children's future. Which requires more courage? Dying is one moment. Living, loving, being tender, even when the world is hard, that takes courage every single day. Keiko watched a father throwing a baseball with his son. The boy missed the catch, and the ball rolled away. The father did not scold him. He did not demand perfection. He just smiled, walked over, and showed the boy how to position his hands differently. They tried again. This time, the boy caught it, and his face lit up with pride. The father clapped and gave him a thumbs up. Keiko thought of her own son back in Tokyo. She had not seen him in over a year. When she thought of him now, she imagined holding him the way these American fathers held their children. Not with the formal distance Japanese culture demanded, but with open affection. She imagined telling him she loved him, not through actions and duties, but with actual words. "I love you." Simple words that Japanese parents rarely said out loud. Yuki's educated mind spun with questions she couldn't stop. She had studied at university. She had read books about Japanese superiority, about destiny, about the divine right of their empire. Her professors had charts and statistics proving Japan's natural leadership in Asia. But those professors had never mentioned this. They never mentioned that American soldiers had families they loved. They never mentioned that the enemy was fully human, just like them. If they lied about Americans being inhuman, what else was a lie? The question haunted her. What about the stories of victory? What about the promises that Japan would win through spirit alone? What about the teaching that Japanese blood was somehow different, somehow better? Sitting on this bench, watching ordinary people love their children, all of it seemed ridiculous now. Not just wrong, but absurdly, obviously false. The guilt came next. Her brother had died in the Philippines. Her uncle had died in China. Millions of men had marched off to war, believing what they were taught. They died for ideas that now seemed hollow. They died because people in power had lied to them about who the enemy really was. That evening, back in their barracks, Fumiko found a pencil and a scrap of paper. She wrote in careful characters, knowing no one would ever read it, but needing to put the words somewhere outside her head. "Today, I saw an American soldier hold his daughter. He was not ashamed. He was not weak. He was more fully human than I have ever been allowed to be. We were taught that feelings make us vulnerable, but I think hiding our feelings is what truly weakens us. These people know what they fight for. We were only told what to die for. There is a difference." She folded the paper and hid it in her pocket. Outside, the celebration continued. Children's laughter, music, the sound of people enjoying life, even in the middle of war. The sound of humanity refusing to be completely destroyed by violence. The sound of something Fumiko was only beginning to understand: hope. In November of 1945, the three women boarded a transport ship heading back to Japan. The war had ended in August, when the emperor spoke on the radio for the first time in history, telling his people to endure the unendurable and accept surrender. Now the prisoners were going home, but none of them felt the relief they expected. Fumiko carried a bar of American soap, wrapped in paper. Keiko had a chocolate bar she had saved for 3 months, protecting it like treasure for her son. Yuki had photographs kind guards had given her, pictures of the base, of the people she had met. The ship was silent. Everyone was thinking about what waited for them. Japan had been bombed, cities were destroyed, families were scattered, and they were returning as prisoners of war, carrying shame that Japanese culture said could never be washed away. When the ship reached Tokyo Bay, the women saw devastation beyond imagining. The city they remembered was gone. In its place were miles of ash and rubble. Buildings stood like broken teeth. People moved through the ruins like ghosts, thin and hollow-eyed. The contrast with American abundance hit harder than ever. This is what we fought for. This is what our leaders brought us to.
Keiko found her son living with her sister in a neighborhood that had somehow survived. The boy was 7 now, skinny and quiet. When he saw his mother, he bowed formally, the way children were taught. Keiko dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms. She held him tight, ignoring her sister's shocked expression. She held him the way she had seen American fathers hold their children, without reservation, without shame. The boy stiffened at first, confused. Then slowly his arms came up and wrapped around her neck. She gave him the chocolate bar and watched his eyes go wide. He had never tasted chocolate before. Her sister said quietly that such displays were not proper. Keiko looked at her and said something she had been practicing for months. Life is too short not to show love. I learned that from the enemy. Fumiko's father had survived, but her mother had died in the firebombing. Her father expected her to apologize for the shame of capture. Instead, she told him about what she had seen. She described the soldiers hugging their children. She explained that Americans were not demons, just people who had been luckier in where they were born. Her father listened in silence, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke. The Americans won. Now they will make us like them. Fumiko shook her head. We do not need to become American. But we can learn that showing love is not weakness, that fathers can be tender, that strength and gentleness can live together. She paused, then added, We lost the war, Father, but maybe we can win something better. Maybe we can learn to be more human. Yuki returned to university and became a teacher. In her classroom years later, she told her students about meeting the enemy face to face. She told them about abundance and kindness. She told them the most important lesson. Question what you were told. Think for yourself. The greatest weapon is not a gun or a bomb. It is a mind that refuses to accept lies. Decades passed. Japan rebuilt and grew prosperous. The generation that fought grew old. Fumiko, elderly now, sat with her granddaughter and told her about the war. The girl asked what she learned as a prisoner. Fumiko smiled and said, I learned that the enemy soldier who hugs his children is not really your enemy. I learned that propaganda turns ordinary people into monsters in our minds. I learned that real strength is being gentle even when the world is hard. The war ended in 1945, she said. But my real education began the day I saw an American soldier hold his daughter, and realized that love, given openly, is not weakness. It is the only thing worth fighting for. Her granddaughter listened carefully, and Fumiko hoped she understood. The future belonged to those who chose love over hate, truth over lies, humanity over ideology. That was the real victory, the one that mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.